Yeah, don't get me wrong. Green financing is not a technical skill in itself. You must have the ability to talk to clients, talk about products at a high level.
Yeah, but it's hard because they don't really have the technical skill, so maybe it's hard for them to know what's going on in the practical world. Hi everyone, welcome back to Green Career Chat. Today we have a special guest with us today. It's Mona. Is the Director of Sustainable Finance and Standard Chartered Bank. And to start with, could you actually share how you started a career in sustainable finance and what drew you in this field?
Thank you for inviting me. I actually started out my career in the bank about 8 years ago in product management. And for the first 4 years of my career, I was pretty much centered around the bank's transaction banking, product management space. And in the last half of it, I actually was part of the team that helped launch the bank's sustainable trade finance proposition, which in its entirety took about a year. And throughout my interactions with the sustainable finance team, the group's sustainability team, I really appreciated the fact that climate change and social issues are so deeply interconnected with financing, and how the bank has a real leverage and a real ability to help drive and influence capital to where it's more needed, which kind of sparked my interest. One thing I'd like to mention is the way the bank had set up its sustainable finance franchise pretty much operated more like a startup at that time, because there was just so much to do, so much to set up, and it was an interesting space for us to kind of innovate new solutions, new structures that could help us direct capital to sustainable projects and sustainable development, and that was what kept the engagement and interest going.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Actually, I know in ASEAN or like in APAC, sustainable finance is a big emerging market.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, would you mind share a bit, actually what is sustainable finance or in a nutshell? We all heard about these terms quite frequent, but then how would you describe your role in sustainable finance?
Sustainable finance as a concept is all about integrating environmental, social, and governance factors into financial services offerings in a way that promotes long-term economic growth while addressing material E&S issues. So there are various products and labels that comes with the concept. Ultimately, what it all aims to do is to align the financial system and incentives to projects that really help serve the UN SDGs, and is becoming an increasing force for in terms of how banks can help redirect capital and also channel investment towards climate mitigation, and also help to address climate risk in the system.
It's really cool to know there's a lot of financial mechanism in the bank. So I'm curious about what is your day-to-day work? How does that look like when you're working with the product in various regions?
Okay, so if I were to break down my day-to-day kind of agenda and responsibilities, I would say 40-50% of that would be spent on transactions. So, putting together pitch books and helping clients to think about how they could approach sustainable finance in their transactions. And through the interaction, really, working with the relationship managers and the product partners, which includes your corporate finance, your transaction banking, financial markets teams, to give the best advice and solution to clients for the transaction on hand. The other part of what I do is really around helping build internal capacity on sustainable finance and concepts. It is a rapidly evolving space, and there's a lot of development, regulatory concepts, frameworks that we have to keep the internal frontline, second line teams updated on. So I spend a lot of my team spends a lot of time working to build internal capacity. The third thing is you pointed out that I work within the region in ASEAN, so there are country stakeholders to work with in terms of building sustainable finance pipeline, talking to the clients, thinking about the strategy. So a lot of regional stakeholder management. And the last one is behind the scenes. There's a lot of research that goes in each time we talk to the client. Every client's different, every kind of approach is different. So there's a lot of research on concepts, semantics, technologies that go in.
So from your experience, what is the most fulfilling part or most interesting area that in your role you're more interested and then you would like to share about more fun fact to us?
I would say that this role has really kept me on my toes. I started my time in university in B school, and this role really allowed me to explore really sits at the intersection of finance and sustainability. Right, I get to apply the concepts I've learned at university, how you look at transactions, how you look at financial structures, and merge that with how the world approaches sustainability, how what are technologies that need solving, and how do you direct capital towards that. What I would also say is that every transaction, every client is different. So in that way, each time you approach things is always with a different lens. A client in Singapore versus a client in Thailand or Vietnam approaches the topic differently. There are different challenges, constraints, and opportunities. So that's where there's a real ability for us to value add to the conversation. My work, as I alluded to it earlier, also involves collaboration with a lot of stakeholders across NGOs, corporations, across the financial services spectrum, with governments. So this collaborative approach really enriches kind of my work experience and also allows me to engage and understand the global challenges on sustainability and how we can collectively do better.
That's really cool because you experience in different stakeholders, and when you really talk to the stakeholder, they have different problem or like they wanted to ask you to engage with them. So how do you view this market, and for example the ASEAN, like how do they play a role in the sustainable market in the world right now?
Okay, so sustainable finance in ASEAN is growing at pace, both from a volume and value perspective. That's what the league table suggests. In the last, I think, 2-3 years, there were definitely macro challenges across the banking spectrum that presented itself, but the sustainable finance market, I think, has held its ground. So we're definitely seeing more traction, more activity, and as each of the markets in ASEAN matures, a lot more interest from the client. So it's the other way around, not just the banks engaging. From a market development perspective, there's also been significant development this year. We saw the launches of the ASEAN Sustainable Finance Taxonomy, the MES Singapore Asia Taxonomy, which really puts in place a set of criteria that allows us to define whether and to what extent economic activities are contributing to sustainable development goals. And that has given the market a lot of guidance in terms of how they can approach sustainable finance, where they should drive more investment towards, and how do you navigate different challenges of definitions and how to bring it all together. Research still indicates that there is a substantial financing gap that exists in ASEAN today in the trillions, which really involves and requires the collaboration of public and private sector players to come together to provide financing to address that. Right, so I think that is something that we talk about every day, every other day, in terms of how do we mobilize more capital, how do we work with the different ministries, the different multilaterals, and really help to address the on-the-ground challenges.
So it's really great to see there's a lot of opportunity right now in the market in such, like for example in ASEAN as well. So what are the biggest challenge when you face when you're executing the deal and across different sustainability products, and how you actually navigate those like complexity?
Okay, as a sustainable finance origination professional, we work very collaboratively with our relationship managers and the product partners to overlay the E&S angle on transactions. So we don't get into the commercials of it. We kind of cover the ESG angle broadly across the spectrum of transactions. So when you say challenges in terms of handling different products, we sit one level above, so we don't have to kind of get into the nitty-gritty of the transaction. What I would say is the biggest challenge in sustainable finance today is how we navigate the risk and reduce the risk of greenwashing in transactions, and really protect investors and savers from mis-selling of products and labels. One other thing is the lack of standardization today in how we approach definitions. So there's no one universal taxonomy or framework that every bank or every corporate refers to. So when a group of us come together on a transaction, there are definitely a lot of criteria, definitions to sort out. The third one is investors today demand a greater amount of transparency in terms of ESG data and the reporting that corporates and financial institutions put out today. So this is something that smaller companies may definitely struggle to provide or get their heads wrapped around. So banks are coming in to see how we could support that and better value add to the conversations with technology that we're looking at to embed within our processes, but also help support clients in scaling up their own data collection and processes.
You also brought a lot of insight into like the transparency and also the centralized framework is very important to for the local market or also like the international market to really look into how we centralize and also be more bring a more regular market. So I'm also curious about what would be the skills or knowledge that you will recommend or you think the youth right now is essential to look into when they wanted to work on the sustainable finance market?
Okay, so my early career in traditional finance really helped aid my transition into sustainable finance in various ways. One, being having the ability to be risk aware, right? You have to know how the bank operates and looks at governance and how we can, again, like I mentioned earlier, prevent greenwashing in transactions. So there are ways in which the bank is evolving to address those risks and challenges. And as a sustainable finance professional, you have to be commercial, but you also have to balance that against the risk the market faces today. The second skill set that would be good to have would be the ability to process data and to analyze data. Sustainable finance, maybe lesser known, involves a lot of data crunching, processing, collection within the bank of our clients' data, and that would be fed into sustainable finance impact portfolios, into portfolio modeling of against our own net zero commitments. And also to get to your finance emissions baseline, you will have to collect, engage clients on data, and that is a whole kind of universe within the bank altogether. So having the ability to crunch data is very much important. The last thing I like to highlight is actually being very collaborative, especially in the bank, in an organization like a bank. You would have to engage and work with a variety of stakeholders all across front line to second line to our functional partners, and that involves again navigating scenarios where targets may not have been met, transactions with ESG angles that you have to debate, deliberate with clients a lot more actively on. So collaboration is a soft skill that is still very much valued as a sustainable finance professional.
Thank you so much for telling us the hard skills part and the soft skills part. And I do think like it's quite essential for the youth that to train and be prepared for entering the market. And so I'm really curious, what would be your advice to giving the youth that without financing background entering into this space?
I think one less appreciated fact which I wanted to share is that sustainable finance actually cuts across a swath of roles. It's not just it's not just a team that looks at transactions. We have a team that looks at strategy, a team that looks at product, data, net zero, finance, and what I'm trying to say here is that don't really limit your view of sustainable finance to someone that looks at transactions and puts it into financing transactions. Without the finance background, coming fresh from university, there are definitely roles in product management that you can consider. How the bank looks at governing its sustainable finance product suite, how it looks to expand across the offerings that the bank have, what are guardrails to put in place for that. If you're interested in data, perhaps a role that cuts across sustainability and data will be interesting to you. So, really, think about, as the bank operationalizes its net zero commitment and its, mobilization, sustainable finance mobilization target, there is a huge set of activity that drives that for the bank. So, traditional banking roles within the construct of sustainable finance do exist as well.
That's cool. So it's actually there's a diverse skills that can involve a lot of different youth from different backgrounds. So actually, what would be the talent gap you foresee in the sustainable finance industry, especially you working with the frontline and talk to the client, and how actually youth can be prepared to actually fill in this gap and to enter this market?
Okay. I think first and foremost, knowledge of green financing products is one of the technical competency you would have to have, right? There are definitely a lot of people who are interested, but what really sets you apart is going to be your, existing knowledge of sustainable finance that you can always glean off like public documentation or public structures in place. The principles are all out there in the market. So really having a good base understanding of that as you enter a conversation to highlight interest to someone in the team would be helpful. I think secondly, knowledge of regulatory landscape and also compliance requirements when it comes to both corporates and FIs are also highly valued as you kind of look into career within sustainable finance. That's a space that continues to evolve with time, and it'll be helpful conversation starter, or that's where the client always needs a bit more advisory around. So having that skill set, again, something that can be picked up from at the base level from public sources would be a useful start for you.
That's very cool, and I do think like for preparation and also look into like this financial framework is really important. And if you could restart your career, what would you definitely do? Better be prepared for like today's like challenge in the sustainable finance field. Like any like interesting thoughts from your end?
Okay. I think one thing that I would do differently is to really get on the ground to understand each market's challenges and nuances. I think as a professional working within the context of Thailand, Vietnam's, Indonesia's kind of net zero commitments, the energy transition challenges versus sitting out of Singapore, it is going to be quite different, right? And I think someone who has on the ground knowledge would have a lot more to learn and offer in a role versus sitting, somewhere where, is a hub as well. So I think one thing that you should consider is how can they bring their skill sets to the organization and really get their hands dirty on, technical skills, projects, so that if you are really interested in a career in banking and sustainable finance, some of that on the ground conversations, competencies would be very useful as you spread that across interactions with clients in the region.
So given that actually the region right now is really like focusing on heavily on the fossil fuel industry, so I would like to ask how sustainable finance solution can really effectively support the decarbonization on the balancing the critical needs for the energy security, especially in ASEAN. We talk about energy security a lot. So I'm just curious, like your thought on that.
Okay. Well, I think you made an important point. We cannot tackle climate change without first helping emerging markets reduce their emissions. Achieving the transition to net zero emissions by 2050 requires a significant amount of climate mitigation investment, and a large portion of that will go to emerging markets, which is currently responsible for about 2/3 of global emissions. And most of this investment will have to be made towards the energy sector. So transition finance is one part of the larger toolbox of sustainable finance that can help corporates and FIs effectively decarbonize, right? Rather than selectively financing corporates on activities which are already green or sustainable in nature, transition promotes the journey of the corporate and actively towards net zero. So we are always looking for ways to finance innovative, energy efficient, emissions efficient ways of doing the same thing in the BU scenario.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for the time that you spent with us. And I think this conversation is really helpful for a lot of people that are interested in sustainable finance or entering this market. And I'm sure that with sustainable finance, we also have a better investment into more like green financing market. So I'm so glad we have you today, and hope you all look forward to the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you. Green financing is not a technical skill in itself. You must have the ability to talk to clients, talk about products at a high level, and technical skills you can learn on the job. Yeah. So it's going to be an uphill struggle. But the way I see people hiring more entry-level roles, you don't really have the finance background, sustainability background. Like what I said, even if you didn't study it, as long as you demonstrate an awareness of it, like you actually put in effort to understand it, that's helpful. Because we have seen more junior people interviewing for roles. They say they want to do sustainable finance, but they don't even know what's a green loan. It's like, so do you really want to do sustainable finance? Because the act of structuring a green loan is pretty basic, something that you can pick up. So having that real genuineness and interest is important.